Morning all. Boris Johnson may have vehemently denied claims that his party whips were intimidating rebel MPs, but now there is said to be growing concern in Downing Street that Sue Gray's investigation into parties at Number 10 has uncovered damaging evidence. Some of his inner circle are said to doubt if the report will ultimately clear him. It's believed it could be published as early as Monday. Speaking overnight in Australia, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said the Prime Minister has her full backing.
The Prime Minister has my 100% support. He is doing an excellent job. Britain was one of the first countries to roll out the COVID vaccine. We've had a very successful booster programme. We're now able to open up our economy again in Britain, and we've got one of the fastest growing economies in the G7. And the reason that we're here in Australia is working with our very close partners to advance freedom and democracy around the world and to protect our country. I want the Prime Minister to continue as long as possible in his job. He is doing a fantastic job. There is no leadership election.
Very pleased to say we're once again joined in the studio by the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng. Minister, lovely to see you this morning. You just heard Liz Truss offering the Prime Minister her full support. I suspect I know the answer to this one, but you find yourself in the same position.
100% behind the Prime Minister.
What we do know, or what has been alleged since the Minister was on the programme yesterday morning, are these allegations of blackmail, of improper coercion, of improper pressure being exerted by the Whip's office. The Prime Minister hadn't had a chance to look at those reports yesterday morning. He will have done by now. What is the conclusion?
I don't know what the conclusion is. Certainly I've been an MP for 12 years now, and I've never heard of the kind of allegations that are being made. Blackmail, the idea that somehow money is being withheld from communities that need it on account of the behaviour of the MPs. I've never heard of anything like that. I find it strange because the Whip's office doesn't actually have the power over spending in that way. But obviously we're going to take the allegation seriously and we need to look to the bottom of it.
You know that the Whip's office doesn't have responsibility for attributing funding. I know that. The MPs that will have been spoken to by the Whip's office will all have been aware of that as well. Isn't the insinuation is that the Whips are operating, under the guidance, or at least with the tacit acceptance that this is going on, of those at the top, of those in Number 10?
Well, as I said, they're not responsible, and you've accepted that they're not responsible for dispersing actual money. So I don't see how they could make those allegations. I've never heard those threats. I've never heard of that. I'm just
it's pretty straightforward, isn't it? They threatened to withhold funding, as indeed the former Conservative MP, now Labour MP for Bury, has suggested. They've threatened to withhold funding, and the reason that MPs are reacting to those threats is they presume that they're coming with the approval of people more senior than the Whip's office.
So, in terms of how the whipping operation works, it's really important that the Whips actually get on with MPs. It's a really important relationship. So I was very surprised to see the allegations. I haven't seen any evidence to back them up. But obviously we have to look and see, what's actually gone on.
What in your mind is acceptable conduct on behalf of the Whip's office? To what extent can they go to try and get recalcitrant MPs to fall into line and do what they want?
Obviously, in any parliamentary democracy, you've got Whips who are trying to enforce party discipline, who are talking to MPs, talking to parliamentarians, and they're trying to persuade people to follow the government line or the party line so that we can get legislation through the Parliament. But allegations of blackmail and intimidation are completely very unusual. I've never heard such allegations, and I think it would be unacceptable.
Well, how then to account for stories which are appearing in the papers about those rebels who have indicated their intention to rebel? Diana Davison, for example, a number of allegations thrown up, a number of comments, insinuations about her sexuality, insinuations about her relationship with alcohol. I mean, are those acceptable?
Look, I think in any political system that we have, there are lots of briefings all the time that are being made. I don't know who's making the briefings. Lots of things are said, lots of accusations about colleagues are made. But as far as the specific allegation about Whips withholding funds, I think that's completely unacceptable. I think any form of blackmail and intimidation of that kind simply has no place in British politics.
Well, what should happen if those allegations?
Forgive me, I don't think it's something that I've ever heard of. I don't think that this is happening.
But it's certainly incredibly serious. I mean, I'll ask the question again. I mean, what would happen? What should happen, actually, in your view, if these allegations are substantiated?
Look, I don't want to get drawn into what will happen if unsubstantiated allegations are proven true. All I would like to say is that it's completely unacceptable and we need to get to the bottom of the matter. But I find it unlikely, frankly, given the nature, what I know of the whips, given what I know of how the Parliament works today, I'd find it very unlikely that these allegations are true.
Let's talk briefly then about Sue Gray. And there are a number of reports this morning suggesting that she has uncovered an email warning Martin Reynolds to cancel the party. If that is confirmed, the Prime Minister has to go, doesn't he?
No, I don't think that's the case at all. No, again, we're prejudging. I know people want to come to conclusions before we can do so. We've got to see what Sue Gray says. And then once the report is out, we can draw our own conclusions, as the Prime Minister has consistently said. Yep,
the Prime Minister has also said a number of things which seem to run counter to the idea that there was indeed a warning that this party should not go ahead because it was a party. I mean, he has said that he received no warning. I mean, if he is shown to have either misled the House or indeed lied, as Steve Baker has said, he has to go, doesn't he?
So, as I said before, I think we've got to wait to the report. Let's see what Sue Gray says. And then after that, I'm sure the Prime Minister will make a statement.
Why do you have to wait for the report to answer a question as straightforward as, if the Prime Minister has misled the House or the Prime Minister has lied, he has to go? Why is it that an impossible question to answer right now? I mean, the answer is obvious, isn't it?
We've said consistently that we will wait for Sue Gray's report. I know you're trying to ask me hypothetical questions if this happens and if that happens, should the Prime Minister...
It's a binary answer. Does the Prime Minister have to resign if he is proved to have misled the House? I mean, in other times, I wouldn't have had to push you for an answer.
So all I want to say is that in this specific instance, we have a report, and I want to see the report before we make any further statements.
I mean, one of the accusations that has been made of Christian Wakeford is that he is in some manner attention-seeking by alleging that not just was funding for a school in his constituency threatened to be withheld, but also there was some suggestions that boundary changes could be made that would be detrimental to his continuing success as a politician. I mean, the person who accused him of attention-seeking was one Nadine Dorris, who appeared in I'm a Celebrity, for goodness sake.
Look, I don't know about what his motivations were. I think you'd have to ask Christian why he defected or why he essentially turned coat and changed his political allegiance. That's a matter for him. I don't know what his motivations were. And as you will appreciate, he's a Labour MP now. And of course, part of his job is to try and discredit the government. I fully accept that. But you'd have to ask him as to why he defected.
I wonder if we can just turn just briefly onto COVID. And of course, there have been a number of changes that have been announced and a number of changes that will take place over the next few weeks. Specifically on the issue of mask wearing in schools, we are seeing a number of reports now that despite the direction from central government, there will be a number of schools still insisting on children wearing masks in environments which the Prime Minister says they don't have to anymore. What should happen in those schools? What should the parents of those children do?
I think that they should follow official guidance. Now, how the schools run, as far as I'm concerned, that's a matter also for teachers and parents to negotiate. But the guidance from the Prime Minister is very clear that we won't need to be wearing masks.
So just to be very specific on this point, schools which are telling their pupils that they should continue to wear masks, they are wrong.
All I say is that they have to follow the guidance, but I'm not here as a business secretary. What happens if they don't follow? I'm not here as a business secretary.
I understand.
I'm not here as the business secretary responsible for the economy, which I thought we might be talking about.
To
tell school teachers and head teachers how they're going to run schools. That's, I'm afraid, not my remit.
OK, one thing which will be your remit is encouraging civil servants working at your department to come back and be back at their desk. When will we be back to normal levels?
I'm hopeful that we can do this as quickly as possible. We're talking to our work staff, particularly in Bays, in my department, and I've said that people should start getting back to normal as soon as they can.
The hospitality industry, though, calling for a return to emergency outdoor dining rules on the high street. I mean, we understand that there may be a few other measures being looked at the moment, perhaps an extension, more grant money, perhaps extension on tax relief. I mean, what is your understanding? Is there going to be anything more for the hospitality industry?
I think we've provided very liberally for the sector over the last 2 years. The Chancellor's been extremely generous with furlough schemes. They've had a business rates holiday, many businesses. They've also had a VAT holiday as well. So there's been huge support, something like £400 billion over the last 18 months or so has been put into the economy. And obviously I speak to hospitality leaders all the time. And I'm suggesting that, what has been the great success is the vaccine rollout. That's managed to keep the economy going. And all the hospitality leaders, the CEOs, the people who run these companies have said the one thing that will destroy the hospitality sector is a return to lockdown. We've avoided that through the vaccine rollout. We've got one of the most open economies in the world at the moment. And also we're seeing a very fast growth rate. So all of that's incredibly encouraging. And I think hospitality leaders, people in the sector, are very happy that we've avoided the lockdowns.
Well, that was close enough to an answer that I am going to move straight on to your brief at the moment. And you can explain to me what a gigafactory might be. It's going to be something which is going to be very important to our economy moving forward. Some will be wondering why perhaps government funds were necessary for its construction.
So the reason why there has been some government money put into this is that we're in a global race. Every advanced manufacturing country in the world wants to attract people to build, as you say, these gigafactories. And what the gigafactory is simply a manufacturing facility for batteries. And batteries power electric vehicles. And people know that electric vehicles are the new coming form of transport. People are transforming their lives by buying these things, and they're running essentially on electricity. This is something that's happening all over the world. And clearly, manufacturing countries like ourselves, like Germany, France, others, want to be able to manufacture batteries for electric vehicles because they can see the demand for them. And the announcement we made yesterday, I was up in Blythe near Newcastle, is hugely significant. I mean, it creates something like 3,000 immediate jobs on the site, and then 5,000 jobs locally, an extra 5,000 jobs for what we call the supply chain, the companies that make the materials that feed into the factory.
So why then the need for, the reports vary, but it seems to be a figure of around about £100 million worth of government money is being put into this.
So
why then the need?
We put in tens of millions. Mm-hmm. The actual amount of money that's being invested is more than north of £2.5 billion. So there's a huge leverage in terms of for every pound we're putting in, we're getting £25 of private investment. And as I said, the reason why we've put a little bit of government money into this is that this is a global competition. Every other country, advanced manufacturing country, is giving subsidies, is giving breaks to companies to invest in electric vehicle manufacturing. And this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. If you haven't got any ability to make electric vehicles, you're never going to build that. And you've got one opportunity to do that in the early 2020s.
Kwasi Kwarteng, always good to see you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Very good to see you. Thanks, Neil.
Still to come on the programme this morning, can Boris Johnson survive as Prime Minister? Well, we've just heard from the Minister at 7:30. I'll be discussing that with Jack Blanchard from Political and Rob Hutton from The Critic magazine. And at 10:02, the First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, will be talking about the easing of COVID restrictions in that country. Also this morning, the Art Academy, that's helping people with their mental health. Well, within the past few minutes, we have had the latest retail figures covering the Christmas period. Our business correspondent, Paul Kelso, has been taking a look at the numbers. Paul, good to see you this morning. Well, certainly I know that for me, Christmas was an expensive one this year. What for the nation as a whole?
Yeah, these December retail figures, this is where we find out whether everyone has been girls and boys and just how generous Santa was. And I'm afraid the news is not good. Retail sales in December were down 3.7%. They have recovered to above pre-COVID levels, shopping on the high street and elsewhere, but across all sectors. Food and non-food, crucially, the gift giving that drives so much of spending in December, sales were down. And they're also down on last Christmas, nearly 1% down on December 2020. Now, there's not a huge amount of detail as to why this might be in the Office for National Statistics release, but what there is points towards Omicron. Of course, we had the imposition of Plan B midway through December, but the squeeze on consumer behaviour really from Omicron began right at the beginning. Christmas spending spree, or what the retailers hope would be on Black Friday, was when we first heard about it. And shopping centres have reported being at their quietest since July 2021. And retailers that the ONS have spoken to have all said they felt Omicron was a reason that people were staying at home. There was an increase in online sales, perhaps unsurprisingly up to nearly 30%. That's up 3 or 4% on November. So the online retail boom hastened by COVID. That certainly seems to be here to stay. But I think what will be worrying, certainly to retailers as they look ahead, is if people weren't willing to spend Christmas, or even at the same levels as a year ago, of course, when we had a previous wave of COVID, how on earth are people going to be thinking about what expendable income they've got as we go into the new year with all the cost pressures that we've been talking about quite frequently? Energy prices, tax increases, interest rates going up, this inflationary environment in the economy. There was not, it appears, a Christmas dividend for retailers.
Paul, many thanks indeed. Now, the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, has warned Moscow to step back from a possible war in Ukraine. Speaking in Australia, she condemned what she called Russia's increased aggression.
The Kremlin haven't learnt the lessons of history. They dream of recreating the Soviet Union or a kind of greater Russia, carving up territory based on ethnicity and language. They claim they want stability while they work to threaten and destabilise others. We know what lies down that path and the terrible toll in lives lost and human suffering it brings. That's why we urge President Putin to desist and step back from Ukraine before he makes a massive strategic mistake.
Well, let's speak to our international affairs editor, Dominic Wagon, who is in Geneva, where the US Secretary of State will be meeting his Russian counterpart for crucial talks later today. Good to see you this morning, Dominic. Just in terms of what we might expect from these talks, I mean, what everyone wants is a de-escalation of the tensions, but it doesn't quite feel we're at that point yet.
No, we're looking at an hour and a half of talks this morning, which isn't that long, is it, Neil? And for the Americans, the challenge is to bring their carrot and stick approach and hope it works this time, because last week's week of talks failed to bring about any breakthrough. The carrots are American compromises, if there are any, concessions towards what they have described as the outlandish demands the Russians have been making. So is there any way the Americans have moved towards these demands that the Russians have been making, and the Russians want to see their responses in a written form that Sergei Lavrov can take back to Moscow with him? The stick is the threat of swift, severe sanctions that we've heard their diplomats threatening for some time should Vladimir Putin invade Russia. And in that challenge, Blinken was undermined by his president's words, of course, a couple of nights ago, where Joe Biden said that the response to a Russian invasion would depend on what kind of invasion. If it was a full-scale invasion, yeah, massive, severe consequences. If it was a minor incursion, then you could see the allies ending up fighting over what to do about it. So Sergei Lavrov's challenge, you might think, is to find that gap, those gaps, those weaknesses and divisions in the Allied ranks and drive a wedge between them in the talks today. He's also got to convince the Americans that the Russians are serious when they threaten what Putin has called military technical responses if he doesn't get his way. I think at the end of this we'll get a better idea as to whether the Russians feel there's anything worth talking about. Lavrov will take those demands or those responses back to Moscow, and then it'll be up to his leader, Vladimir Putin, to work out what to do next. Does he feel that there is something worth continuing talking about, despite the failures we've seen to bring about any breakthrough in these talks so far, or does he feel it's time now to do something more drastic?
Dom, many thanks. Some other news now. COVID rules are being relaxed in parts of the UK today. The First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, is to announce an easing of restrictions, moving the country to alert level 0. Now, this allows crowds at outdoor sporting events and unrestricted outdoor hospitality. COVID restrictions will also be eased in Northern Ireland from today, where the rule of 6 in pubs and bars will be removed, as well as the limit on gatherings of no more than 3 households. And as for the most up-to-date COVID figures in the UK, 107,364 new cases reported, 330 new deaths, bringing the total number of people who've died within 28 days of a positive test to 153,202. Austria's parliament has approved a universal COVID-19 vaccine mandate for adults. That's the first of its kind in Europe. The mandate will come into force next month, with authorities writing to every household to inform them of the new rules. From mid-March, police will start checking people's vaccination status during routine checks. Thousands of pensioners have been waiting decades for repayment of their pensions worth over £1 billion, that according to the Public Accounts Committee. The Department for Work and Pensions is accused of short-changing 134,000 people since 1985. Meg Hillier, chair of the Public Accounts Committee, spoke to us yesterday.
Behind the scenes, the DWP has a complex set of IT systems which all don't talk to each other. So it requires a highly trained member of staff to understand what questions to interrogate different systems on, match that all together and work out if someone's being paid the right pension. And that's where the problem has arisen, because these systems are not connected.
An American Airlines flight to London was forced to return to Miami after a passenger refused to wear a face mask. The airline called Miami police and officers escorted a woman from the plane. Now, a 57-year-old Tongan man who was forced to swim for 28 hours after being swept out to sea by the tsunami has been described as a real-life Aquaman. Lasala Folau tried to climb a tree to escape the water, but was swept away by the torrent. Greg Milam reports now from Fiji.
Lizala Folau never expected to be sitting in front of the cameras, but that's what a remarkable story of survival does for you. The 57-year-old, a retired carpenter who finds even walking difficult, survived in the water for 28 hours after being washed out to sea. He ended up 8 miles from home and told us his faith got him through.
The most scariest part to me during the ordeal was when the waves took me from land into the sea. What came into my mind when I was helpless at sea were 2 things. 1, that I still had faith in God. 2, is my family. And I only remembered how my family would think at that moment. Maybe he died.
Much of his home island of Atata was destroyed by the tsunami that hit Tonga. Still, his hope is to go back.
Everything is gone. But my heart is at Atata. And I was raised there. My parents are buried there. And I will go back there one day.
Inspiring stories are one thing, the practical needs are urgent. The arrival then of the first aid flights packed with water, shelter, generators and communications equipment was a welcome sight in Tonga. On the runway, locals spent days clearing of volcanic ash by hand. The protective gear, evidence of the effort to make sure they don't bring COVID as well. Lizala Folau now has the nickname Aquaman, after a movie he says he's never seen. The real-life experiences of nature, he says, are plenty.
No man can withstand the power of nature. What we need to understand is how we react when it comes. How do we treat it when it comes? For me, I just want to be cool, to be calm when it comes.
He seems to have succeeded. Greg Milam, Sky News, Fiji.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
High pressure will keep things mostly settled, but the cloud will increase from the northwest, limiting any frost this weekend. It's a mostly fine start with a widespread frost, locally severe in the south, but the northwest is cloudier and milder. There'll be plenty of morning sunshine for eastern Scotland, central, southern and eastern England and the far south of Ireland. Elsewhere, the cloud will build, giving some patchy drizzle in places, mainly on the hills in northwest Scotland.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
A reminder as to our top stories this hour. COVID restrictions are being relaxed in Wales, with no limits on the number of people who can meet outdoors. The Foreign Secretary has told Russia to step back from Ukraine, warning that an invasion would lead to a terrible quagmire and loss of life, similar to that during the Soviet-Afghan War. Sky News understands that Downing Street is nervous that the lockdown party investigation could contain damaging evidence which might bring down the Prime Minister. Well, within the last half an hour, the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, has toed the party line, saying that we need to wait for the results of the Sue Gray investigation. On accusations, though, that rebel Tory MPs have been facing intimidation and blackmail threats from government whips, he said he didn't think it was likely, but the claims would be investigated.
As far as the allegation, the specific allegation about whips withholding funds, I think that's completely unacceptable. I think any form of blackmail and intimidation of that kind simply has no place in British politics.
Well, what should happen if those allegations?
Forgive me, I don't think it's something that I've ever heard of. I don't think that this is happening.
But it's certainly incredibly serious. I mean, I'll ask the question again. I mean, what would happen? What should happen, actually, in your view, if these allegations are substantiated?
Look, I don't want to get drawn into what will happen if unsubstantiated allegations are proven true. All I would like to say is that it's completely unacceptable and we need to get to the bottom of the matter. But I find it unlikely, frankly.
Let's bring in our political correspondent, Kate McCann. Morning, Kate. Well, I had a go. But how close did we actually get to an answer there? On the very specific questions of those allegations being made about the way in which the Whip's office, and indeed others within government, are operating right now?
Yeah, I think, look, at the end of the day, you could have asked him that question 15 times over and you wouldn't necessarily have got any further with it. Because at the moment, everybody in government is waiting for that Sue Gray report. Yeah. And until that comes out, they're just not prepared to go anywhere near any of these questions, despite how serious actually some of them are. And I thought it was really telling when you said, you know, not just these allegations about money potentially being withheld or withdrawn or MPs being threatened with things by the whips, but the allegations of stories in the newspapers around some of these potential rebels or people who've expressed, you know, concern about the way Number 10 is run. And the fact that Kwasi Kwarteng said, well, you know, this goes on in politics all the time, that's not really necessarily, for those people who are facing it, a good enough answer. And there are questions about the culture and the way that politics is running at the minute. And actually that feeds into, doesn't it, that conversation in Number 10 about why were parties acceptable? Why did people think that it was OK to bend the rules or even break the rules in some circumstances? So Sue Gray is the next big pinch point, I think, for the Prime Minister. And when we talk about letters and the potential for that to be problematic, that's when it really comes back into focus. I
think you might just have a point. Kate, many thanks indeed. So the big question is, obviously, can Boris Johnson survive as Prime Minister? Joining us this morning to discuss that, Jack Blanchard, UK political editor at Political Europe, and Rob Hutton, parliamentary sketch writer at The Critic magazine. Chaps, very good to see you both. Rob, let's come to you first, and just the broad brush question to get us started here. Is this survivable for the Prime Minister? Certainly, senior figures within his cabinet might not wish it to be the case, but they're certainly saying it's the case.
I think it's not, because it's a scandal the public has noticed. You can get away with an awful lot in politics if the public doesn't notice. And Boris Johnson has got away with an awful lot. Things public noticed, things public didn't mind. This is something the public does mind and has definitely noticed. And whatever happens, I actually can't see what Sue Gray can bring back that would say, you know what, it was completely fine to go out, even just to that single May 20th party, even if there were nothing else. It was OK to have that. It was OK for you to go out there. I mean, maybe she's going to reveal he was working undercover to bust party organisers or something. But, I mean, what? What's she going to say?
Jack, what do you make of the latest revelations in this story? The idea that the Whip's office have been deploying, underhand tactics, threatening to withhold funding, looking at constituency boundaries. I mean, the argument from some senior politicians appears to be, well, this has gone on since time immemorial. But in what other profession would it be appropriate to threaten, to coerce action in quite that manner?
Well, the answer is almost no other profession, but then politics is like no other profession. And the truth is that this sort of thing has gone on pretty much forever since we had politicians, the skullduggery and the arm twisting and so on to get them to each other to do what they want them to do is just how politics works. And people might not like it, but that is the reality of it. So having said that, if they're really prepared to start revealing text messages and secret voice recordings, as it suggested in some of the newspapers this morning about some of the actions of the Whips, that really could shine a light on practices which have been very much done behind the curtain since time immemorial. And I think that would really change the picture completely in Westminster. That might actually start to change the culture, but it would be a pretty nuclear option for an MP to do. It's hard to see any way back for them within their party if they're really prepared to do that.
Rob, shortly after the crossing of the floor of Christian Wakeford, there emerged two schools of thought. One, that this was incredibly damaging for the Prime Minister and would hasten his exit. The other view, that this actually served to sharpen minds in the Conservative backbenches. Some letters may have been withdrawn and a few others may well have decided not to submit it. Both can't be true, so which one is it?
I think both can be true, actually.
Okay.
Losing a backbencher, losing an MP is clearly bad. Okay, and any pretense that this is a blessing in disguise. It's like, would you like to lose another one? Obviously, obviously it's bad. On the other hand, it does also seem to be the case that it did slightly sort of sharpen minds is the wrong thing, because I think everyone's pretty acute on this, but that it did slightly just give Tory MPs pause, because if you're planning to defenestrate the Prime Minister, your argument is, I am doing this for the good of the party, and if you don't want it to be associated with a guy who no longer wants the good of the party, who's gone and joined another party. So I sort of, yes, I mean, I think it sort of it helped him for a couple of days, but the idea that in a month's time everyone will be saying, oh yeah, you know what really turned things around for Boris Johnson when his MPs started leaving. No, obviously not.
Jack, so is there then, in your mind, just having listened to Rob, I mean, is there an inevitability that we will get to the requisite number of letters to trigger that confidence vote? And if so, from that point onwards, I mean, there still remains a chance that the Prime Minister can win it.
Yeah, every chance. I mean, even Theresa May won a confidence vote from her own party, and she was not the most popular or effective Prime Minister, as many people remember. Having said that, she won the confidence vote and, of course, was still turfed out by her party not very many months after that. So even winning a confidence vote for Boris Johnson would certainly not be the end of the matter. Having said that, I am less certain than Rob about the ultimate outcome about all of this, simply because this is Boris Johnson we're talking about, and this is a guy who's been getting away with it for the whole of his life, and I certainly don't think it's beyond him to squeak his way out of this latest scrape either. That's certainly what they believe is going to happen in Downing Street. I think the hope is that the report by Sue Gray will be pretty inconclusive in terms of whether rules were actually broken and grey areas, if I can use the slightly unfortunate pun around work.
You can use it once. You can use it once, Jack, never again.
That's my limit. I promise I promise I won't go there again. But that might allow the Prime Minister to say, look, yes, maybe this wasn't quite the most appropriate thing, but, there's been no evidence found of rule breaking. Let's all move on. And here's lots of shiny things I want to announce now to talk about instead. And his supporters in the newspapers will try and move the story on at that point. And it is possible that they will succeed. I don't think it's certain or even necessarily that likely, but I certainly wouldn't be putting my money on Boris Johnson being out anytime soon.
I mean, Rob, the insinuation from some of the Prime Minister's closest allies is that all of this focus on parties which took place months ago, on frippery, on froth, on Westminster bubble stories, is perhaps distracting attention from the fact we've got the Russians massing on the border with Ukraine. I mean, there is a degree of truth to that argument, isn't there? There is a degree of focus that has perhaps been taken away from something perhaps rather more newsworthy?
Yeah, okay. I'll give you the Russians amassing on the borders of Ukraine as a bigger and potentially more important story. The thing is, though, saying, "Oh, well, it's about a glass of wine," is not right. It's about integrity. Fundamentally, it's about, do the people who set the rules follow the rules, and when the Prime Minister stands up and says that didn't happen, and says to Parliament that never happened, do we believe him? And I thought what was interesting yesterday was that when Boris Johnson said, "Well, I've never heard of any whips threatening anyone," the immediate thought that everyone went to was, "Well, 6 weeks ago you were telling us that you'd never heard about any parties, happening outside your office, underneath your flat." Once you lose trust with the public on something, as I say, I mean, this is where I differ with Jack, actually, because he has got away with lots of stuff, but he's got away with lots of stuff that fundamentally people thought didn't matter. And everybody noticed lockdown, and everybody understood the rules of lockdown. And even, even if you didn't have a tragic story, everybody knows what they were supposed to be doing in 2020. And to have the Prime Minister stand up and say, "God, I saw all these people, and it never occurred to me that was a problem." Between press conferences in which I've been telling people, you can meet one person if you stand 2 meters away and you keep moving, but you mustn't have too much. Yeah. But are there other really worrying things going on in the world? Yes, there are. Yes. Yeah.
Hannah, thanks very much indeed. Now, COVID restrictions in Wales are due to be relaxed from today, with no limits to the number of people who can take part in outdoor events. Joining us once again on the programme, the First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford. Mr Drakeford, good to see you this morning. Just explain the level of confidence that you must be possessed of to be pushing forward the rolling back of these COVID measures.
Well, Neil, if I was summarising the position in Wales, I would say that we are over the worst, but not out of the woods. This week, the numbers have improved day by day. We've now got the lowest number of people suffering from coronavirus of any part of the United Kingdom, and numbers in hospital have started to come down as well. But we've still got to monitor the data day by day, make sure that it is safe to take the next step. Today, as you said, all restrictions in outdoor activities are returning to what we call alert level 0. And provided things remain on track, on Friday of next week, we'll be able to do the same thing for indoor activities as well.
Just in terms of events, and of course with the Six Nations fast approaching, with plenty of people where you are very much looking forward to being able to watch one of the games, in the stadium, surrounded by the rest of their fans. What though of those indoor events, for which, for the time being at least, the COVID pass will still be required for entry? I mean, is that something that you see continuing in perpetuity?
Not in perpetuity. I certainly hope that. We're committed to reviewing that on the 10th of February. So that will stay in place for a bit longer than some of the other protections we put in place, in order to make sure that Wales goes on having a smooth path out of the Omicron wave that hit us so very badly over Christmas and early in the new year, but which, in line with the modelling, seems to be receding very quickly as well.
Well, just on that point, just for clarity then, as you say, the next 3-weekly review due to take place on the 10th of February, I think you said. Is it possible that that is the day on which you could conceivably see an end to using the COVID pass for entry into indoor events?
I think it's conceivable, but by no means guaranteed. We've just seen in the last week or so how fast things can change with this virus, and the 10th of February is still 3 weeks away. So if things continue to improve at their current rate, and we were in a position to lift some of the further protections, of course that's what we want to do. But in Wales, we will only do it when we're sure we have the clinical advice, the scientific advice that would tell us that it would be safe to do that.
Can you just explain, though, just a bit of the justification for the COVID pass itself? As I understand it, Big Brother Watch, the campaign organisation, seeking a judicial review of the mandatory COVID pass policy?
Yes, that is certainly the case, and other governments face similar challenges. We are confident that the COVID pass has done two things. It has offered extra protections to people from falling ill, because you know that if you're in a venue where everybody else has been fully vaccinated, then you know that those risks of catching coronavirus are reduced, and it's given people confidence to return to those settings as well, knowing that if you do go to somewhere where the pass is mandatory, then everybody else there has done the right thing, has taken up vaccination, has done what they can to protect themselves. And I've been really struck by the number of people who've said to me that the pass makes them feel far more confident in going out, going about, taking part in those sorts of settings. So it's been good for health, but it's been good for business as well.
How confident then are you that the actions being taken in terms of the rollback of COVID restrictions just over the border from Wales and England, how confident are you that the pace of that change here is not perhaps just slightly too quick given where the data is?
Certainly we would not be moving at the pace that English ministers have been announcing. Look, I'd have to say, anybody watching what has gone on in Westminster will know that those announcements are not driven by the science. They're not part of a carefully thought out plan. They're just an effort by UK ministers to find a different headline from the one that has dominated the news because of all the difficulties that they have got into of their own making. Now, here in Wales, we are in a better position than that. Our government is able to go on making sensible, cautious, planned decisions rooted in the science and in keeping people in Wales safe. And I think the contrast between our two positions has been pretty stark this week.
Let's focus then just briefly, if we can, of the travails of the Prime Minister and indeed the Conservative government in general. Do you think there is an inevitability now that that leadership challenge will come to fruition? Do you think Boris Johnson's position is in doubt?
Well, Conservative MPs have been fighting each other like ferrets in a sack this week, and it's very hard to see how the Prime Minister survives. And even if he were to survive, he will just limp on because he's never going to escape the damage that this week has done to his reputation. From my point of view, the thing that worries me the most is the fact that the UK government is frozen by the impact of what has happened to them. They're just not able to make the sorts of decisions you'd expect a government to make because everything is seen through this lens. The attempt to try and shore up the Prime Minister, to protect him from the attacks that his own side are making on him. And that means it's a government that's turned in on itself and isn't capable of doing the job that it was elected to do.
Mark Drakeford, I'm afraid we will have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us again on the programme. Appreciate it.